Do you believe in the existence of extraterrestrials?
Good morning, good evening, or good afternoon, depending on where and when you're watching this broadcast. I'm Thomas Fessler, my friends, and this is Disclosure Tonight. Happy Thursday, February 20th. What happened? Yeah, I know we usually have a show come on Fridays, but you know what? We've got a special guest here, my friend. Yes, we've got the one, the only Richard Dolan. Go ahead and join us here on Disclosure Tonight. What a beautiful opportunity to talk with such an astounding gentleman. Richard, my friend, welcome to Disclosure Tonight. It's great to have you here.
Hi, Thomas. It's a pleasure. Really enjoying being on here already.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Yeah, we have a little fun here and like the music and everything, get to it. So let me jump into the interview studio. Here we go. Let's go ahead and welcome. Yes, today we'll be talking about a history of USOs, also known as unidentified submerged objects, volume 1, supposedly of 3. Yes, Richard is this is his first of a 3-volume series exploring mysterious underwater phenomena, covering a whopping 178 documented cases. This meticulously researched book examines sightings in oceans, lakes, and rivers up until 1969. Richard blends a historical and scientific inquiry, analyzing overlooked accounts and questioning whether USOs are advanced technology, natural phenomena, or perhaps something else. Featuring illustrations by Alan Levine. If you remember, he was on our show here on Monday of this week. The book draws from military reports, eyewitness accounts, and historical records to uncover patterns across time and geography. More than a collection of stories, this volume challenges readers to rethink what lies beneath the Earth's oceans. Whether skeptic or believer, it offers a compelling dive into the unknown. Welcome, Richard. It's great having you here today.
Yeah, thank you. That book project has become all-consuming for me. It's been the last 3 years of my life. The first volume has just been published this last week. The second and third volumes will be out very soon. All
really?
of the cases,
Nice.
They've all been written. All 672 cases are completely written, and I'll just be putting the other 2 volumes into kind of a nice book form over the next couple of months.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, to start this off, got to ask the question, what inspired you to write this 3-book trilogy on USOs?
Kind of came out of the blue. I have a great website. I've got wonderful people there. It's at richarddolanmembers.com, and I will often put up various posts and video content and audio and articles. And about 3 years ago, I did a little video presentation on a case from 1945 by the Aleutian Islands, and it is a USO case. And that was about it. It just was very popular with my site, and I was into it. And I thought, well, let's look for a couple of more of these cases. I've always been kind of interested in USOs to begin with. I mean, water-based UFO phenomenon. Yeah, that's interesting, mysterious. There's not been a lot of writing done on that subject particularly. So during the spring and summer of 2022, I just did a lot of research, hunting down, scouring parts of the internet to look for good cases. And I thought, this is actually quite fascinating. And I just stayed with it. And the next thing I knew, I was working on a kind of an involved project. And I'm very glad I did it.
Yeah.
I found much more than I went in looking for. I will say that.
Yeah, definitely, and it's a story. You know, if you look back at it, the earliest report I can remember, at least learning throughout my history and researching this, you completely eclipsed my knowledge base, sir. The earliest case I heard of, you know, Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492, and as he came across, didn't he encounter something that we could call USOs?
Yeah, possibly. He saw something very unusual. This is absolutely true, and I do write about this in this first volume here. So what happened? It's less than a day before Columbus actually landed on the New World in Hispaniola, Dominican Republic, and Haiti. And one of his crewmen and he saw this light, and it was nighttime, and it was kind of going up and down and side to side a little bit. And he couldn't figure it out. No one was able to figure it out. It was an odd thing. And then a number of hours later, they hit landfall. So the question is, what did he see? Short answer is no one really has a good final solution to this. We don't really know what it could have been. There's been theories like it's been bioluminescence from the water. That doesn't seem to be really quite right here. There was a theory that he was actually seeing a light on one of the ships that was probably ahead of him. Columbus's ship, the Santa Maria, was probably in the middle. We don't know this for a fact, but it's likely that's normally what happened. But, to my mind, I can't imagine Columbus making such a rookie mistake as mistaking a lamp on the ship ahead of him for some unknown light. I mean, he was one of the most experienced sailors and navigators in the world. And then finally, there's thoughts that it might have been something on the land itself. Perhaps if it was on some elevated part of the island, he might have been able to see it. There's really not a good solution to it. And the other solution is, did he actually see a UFO or USO? And I don't know. That's a good one. It's a tough one. I don't actually even include that as an official case because to me, it's still a little bit vague. It's not what I would consider a strong case, but it definitely is an interesting possibility.
Well, if you think about, stepping away from USOs for a second, what is it? We have that sighting that happened over Europe in the late 1500s, I think, where they have those wooden plaques that they built, and they have it where they're showing triangles or chevrons, and there were arrow-shaped craft and lots of orbs.
Yeah, that was in Nuremberg, and I would think that was 1561, I believe. And so some people will not like what I'm going to say. Others may like what I'm going to say, but I'm kind of tough on some of the ancient UFO reports. I don't know how strong a lot of them are. When I review them, and I've read a lot of them, there are some that definitely are intriguing to me. So I'm not saying there were no ancient UFOs, no ancient aliens. But I do think a lot of those early cases are a lot weaker than we tend to think. And that's one of them. I'm actually not a big fan of that one because the guy who did that woodcut was named Hans Glaser. And he, there's a whole bit of text that he wrote that went with that image. It's a great image. It's really cool looking. But he, first of all, described it at like super early in the morning. So I'm thinking, all right, so you're up watching this thing. It was like 5 a.m, some very early hour. This massive display in the sky. The thing is that Nuremberg at that particular time was right smack dab in the middle of the German Civil War, which was a war of religion. And I don't know, what you find with a lot of those early accounts is they get very into this idea of we have to tell a moral tale here. So they'll, often create fictitious stories. I mean, these aren't all true of what they saw, and that's a portent of whatever it is they're trying to, prove is God's word or the word of the heavens for, how to be interpreted. So I'm not sure about that one. I'm not saying it didn't definitely happen, but I'm a little cold on that one.
Well, at least I was trying to pull from history a little bit. I can see where you're coming from. It's hard to pull from ancient tales or even paintings that were, painted for the Vatican and for the Catholic Church back in the day, because again, it's an artist's representation of something they were told to paint, not necessarily them actually going and painting facts.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a very avid student of ancient history. I'm really into it, and I love it. I have a tremendous respect for our great ancestors who, pioneered so many amazing things. And plus, they were outdoors more than we are, so they would be more likely to see things in the sky. And you absolutely need to pay attention to what they're talking about. But the reality is, a lot of the ancient stories that have come to us are not easy to understand if we don't understand their particular culture at the time. There's a lot that I think we miss, and I'll just leave it at that. I think there are some very good ancient UFO accounts, so I'm not trying to debunk them all.
Oh, absolutely. I agree. I agree with you completely about that. Just to back up a little bit, back on the topic again, sorry for jumping around a little bit. ADD, I guess. But how do USOs, in your opinion, differ from traditional UFOs or UAP?
They're kind of similar. I mean, I tried looking at, what really distinguishes them. So you talk about the shape of the objects. There's lots of disc-shaped USOs. There's cigar-shaped USOs, just like, above the ground. There are spherical or orb-like USOs, just like what we get, above ground. There are some triangular USOs. In fact, black triangular USOs, and we do hear about black triangles as UAP. So in terms of like the actual craft, I'm not 100% convinced that they're radically different than what we are seeing above the ground. What's weird about the USOs is that, you just instinctively wonder, like, what are they doing down there in the ocean? Like, where are they in the ocean? Do they have a base under the deep ocean floor, on the ocean shelf? What's the point of this? Because it's just the ocean is so mysterious, particularly to me. I'm a landlubber. I'll make no bones about it. I'm not an experienced navigator out on the seas or anything like that, but I'm curious.
Yeah.
But in terms of what they're actually doing, they do a lot of the same things that they do above ground. They interfere with military vessels, for one. So they will disable with electronic magnetic interference operations on civilian and definitely military vessels. There's a lot of those types of cases. They are curious about what we seem to be doing, just like on land. So I don't really know that I could say the behaviors are radically different than what we get above over land. But the fact is, when I started looking into these ocean-based cases, a couple of things jumped out at me. One, I didn't know 99% of them. And I've got like a decent understanding of case history of UFOs. And these USO cases were almost utterly unknown to me, with a few exceptions. And I don't know if they were known to anyone. It's like they didn't even get to the level of being forgotten, because I don't know if many of them were ever remembered in the first place. So there's that. They're utterly fascinating. And the more I got into it, the more fascinated I became in just tracking them down. And honestly, it was a matter of like wanting to resuscitate these cases from these individuals, many of whom, especially in this first volume, they're not even alive any longer. But they had these unbelievable, extraordinary encounters that left them baffled, after which they often had to deal with disbelief or even ridicule. And I thought, I'm not happy with that. I think they deserve better. And I thought, let's see how well I can do in polishing and cleaning up their stories and telling them in a way that might make them happy. Yeah, and that was really my goal.
Yeah, what would you say would be the most compelling of those historical cases of USOs?
Many are good ones. When we go back into the distant past, there's several from the 19th century that are just, in my opinion, excellent cases. One of my favorites is from 1825, 200 years ago, as we sit here. And it was in the Pacific Ocean, an English vessel not far from Hawaii. In fact, they were returning from having dropped off, believe it or not, the king and queen of Hawaii had been on some kind of diplomatic mission to the United Kingdom. So they're dropped off, and this English vessel is now moving away from Hawaii, several hundred miles away, I believe. And at 3:30 a.m. on August 11th, 1825, we have a log notebook from the ship's doctor. So I think of like the movie Master and Commander. It's like that era. And we remember the doctor on that movie. He was really a great character. So I think of this as something like that. And he's recording from 3:30 a.m. He said this object, it was described as like a red hot cannonball, looked like it came up from the water, from below the water, rose up to a certain distance. It was intensely bright. He said it was so bright, one could pick a pin off the deck. And then it descended into the water. And then it happened a second time, apparently, according to his notes. That's all we have on this. But here's the thing about it. He wrote it down at the time, so it wasn't like 50 years later. He recorded it when it happened. And he seemed like a very sober kind of a guy. Like he had this extended logbook. It was very matter of fact. And then this crazy thing is like smack dab in the middle of it. I tried the best that I could to figure out, is there a naturalistic explanation for this? And I just cannot think of anything that would be remotely satisfying. I saw no evidence or reason to disbelieve this man. We have his name. It's Andrew Bloxham. He had a career after this. He's a known person. Crazy thing. So what is it out in the Pacific Ocean that would rise twice from the water? And the thing about that, these glowing orangey reddish fireball orbs type things, they've been recorded many times. I have a case almost identical to it from 1971 that involved a U.S. aircraft carrier, the USS John F. Kennedy.
Mm-hmm.
That too, in July of 71, this will be in my second volume, but there's this large orange sphere that was seen just directly above the ship, freaked out everyone on the vessel, like to the point of screaming hysterically, freaking out, like that level. Knocked off all communications of the ship. And we know this because the man who wrote about it, James Kopf, ran the communications station at that time, described it in detail, and said, got nothing but gibberish in or out for the next 20, 25 minutes. So that ship was essentially incapacitated by a glowing orange sphere, almost identical to what Andrew Bloxham in 1821 described.
Right. It almost sounds like, gosh, there was I swear there was an incident off the East Coast. Maybe it was with the USS Russell, where they had a couple VW bug-sized orbs trailing behind the ships, and then passing right over the ship, and they look like giant plasma balls, bright orange.
Yeah, this is much more recent, I believe. Correct?
Yeah, of course, yes.
Yeah. These orbs, they can come in different colors. A lot of times they seem to be orange, but they can be in a variety of. They can be white, and they can be other colors as well. And one thing that definitely seems to be the case is that there's a lot of electromagnetic interference that is associated with these types of sightings. Not simply the orbs, but definitely including them. And the thing that I can't yet understand is, first of all, it's not hard to understand that they're curious about human technology. Like that I can get. But this EM interference that comes up so frequently is a very interesting aspect of this phenomenon. And it happens more frequently with military vessels than with civilian vessels. So it seems to me that they kind of know what they're doing. There's a lot of strangeness about this phenomenon, I have to say. Yeah. It's one mind-blowing exploration for me.
Oh gosh, yes. Besides, we've had a bunch of different, like you were talking about the cases where people who were on the ships, they've talked about it. Have there been any official government or military acknowledgement of USOs to date?
Yes and no. So in a lot of the cases that I've researched, there is absolutely confirmed U.S. government documentation supporting and actually proving that this such and such an event happened.
Yeah.
So we have, of the cases that I researched, a portion of them are just some person's testimony. That is true. But another portion of them are supported by very, very strong U.S. government documentation, sometimes by journalists as well doing their research. But some of them are U.S. government, and that includes CIA, that includes Navy, that includes Air Force. So in that sense, we can say that they're confirmed. But the United States government, even in this era now where, we've gotten some level of openness and acknowledgement that there's something going on in terms of these UAP, I would say no, there's not. I wouldn't say that we've got a confirmation from the government that this is real in the sense that many of us think it's real. That is anomalous, not from around here, not from our society. I don't think that they haven't gotten to that point. And of course, that's an interesting question. What would ever get the U.S. government to that point?
Well,
certainly the drones didn't do it. Even with the Trump administration, they did their little press conference, and they sounded like it could have come right out of the previous administration with that explanation.
Yeah. Well, then again, we didn't have any of the heads of the departments in place yet that Trump potentially wanted to have. So fingers crossed.
Exactly.
We'll get something with a new head of the FBI, new head of the CIA, who is John Ratcliffe, who was the director of national intelligence. And John Ratcliffe said more stuff about the phenomenon than at that time, if you want to call it, Director Avril Haines. So it's just a matter of, we've got a lot of good people that have lined up. Get to those questions. Look, get to that comment.
I'm looking forward to it. I take your point that, it was early days and they were kind of probably caught off guard by what to say about the drones anyway. And I'm sure, Trump had said, well, I'll answer that like my second day in office or something. And I'm sure that was a bridge too far.
Yeah.
So we'll see how I can
fingers
go on
crossed, the planets align. We've got a great executive staff of people running these departments. They're all lining up and saying, yeah, we want to bring it out. Let's hope Anna Paulina Luna can do make some magic and bring out the truth.
Agreed.
Now, okay, so quick question on this one. So, considering all the different places about USOs but could potentially be, are there areas where they've been frequently reported?
Yeah, several. So first of all, I would say, in my opinion, the biggest hotspot that I can visually just identify would be the area around Puerto Rico.
Right.
Which is incredibly active, especially since like the 1970s, I would say. Maybe some longtime islanders there would say even longer, but the cases that I'm finding, at least from the 70s onward, very, very deeply active. Also off the coast of California, most people know about Catalina Island and the Channel Islands in general. I would say that's very active with interesting action and sightings. But also there's a number of other areas, even around the United States. So the whole northeastern coastline going up into Canada is very, very active. Gulf of Mexico, or Gulf of America, if you want to say that, I think is quite active. And then other parts of the world, I would say off the coast of South America near Buenos Aires. I would say east, like the Western Pacific, like South China Sea, or there's a lot of activity going on in that general region that one could consider a hot spot. And I think there's probably a number of others. I don't think there's a place on this planet where these things have not been seen. And we can talk some like utterly remote areas, like north of the Aleutian Islands, the Bering Sea. There's sightings there. They are in various parts of the Arctic Ocean. They have been seen. They've been seen. The only area where I haven't gotten a lot of them might be parts of the South Pacific, but there's practically no one living in a lot of that area, so it might be hard to get some eyeballs there. Yeah. So this seems to be a very wide-ranging phenomenon.
Yeah.
Oh, Black Sea, I would definitely say that is a hot spot.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Wherever there's military and to attract them, to say the least. Now, have our naval forces documented these encounters in their records?
Some, yes, and often, let's say, unofficially.
Yeah.
What I mean by that, I'll just do that part first. Many of the accounts that I've collected would be like classic examples. Some Navy guy writing 30 years after the fact to the National UFO Reporting Center online and saying, I've been out of the Navy for a while. 30 years ago, I was on this ship in this body of water and this crazy thing happened. And then he would write about it. So that's not an official Navy report. That's just a guy who was there talking about it after the fact. And there's a lot of that. Now, there are cases from the Navy that are much stronger than this, that would rise to the level of confirmed cases. So, we've got a bit of all of it. When I was putting this together, unlike my first book that I wrote many years ago, UFOs and the National Security State, I tried really hard to work off of as much government authenticated documentation as I could, because I wanted those cases to be as bulletproof as possible. With USOs, it's, I had to really use a broader criteria, and I had to use my judgment. And I'm reading cases by these people who are writing many years after the fact, and I have to make a decision. Do I just want to ignore it because it's not officially sanctioned by the U.S. government? It's not part of FOIA. And I'm not comfortable doing that. I think these people have a story to tell, and I elected to include a lot of those types of cases.
Yeah. So it sounds like it's few and far between to find any declassified documents that could shed light on this USO activity.
I would say maybe 10% of the cases that I have in here, I would classify as very like open and shut, bulletproof in terms of evidence, in terms of the quality. And I would say another percentage below that, another 20% would be considered strong by any reasonable estimate. And I would say the large bulk of them would be considered solid by any reasonable estimate. But in terms of U.S. government declassified, no, that would be a minority of them.
Yeah, it seems to be that way. It seems like if you look back, we had the UAPTF, the UAP task force. We got some really good information, some really good reports that came out. And then as soon as we got RO and started getting the subsequent reports, it's like we have the deep state trying to shove the perpetual UFO or USO toothpaste back in the tube.
Well, yeah, and sometimes we fall into the trap of remembering and believing that we actually have an open, truly democratic society. And I mean, I'm one of those people that probably doesn't believe that. What do we do have? That's a whole other thing. We could talk about that for days. But what I would say is we have a very opaque series of institutions. They are not in the habit of dispensing the truth out the way that the public would probably prefer. And that's just the reality of it. And that's been our system for a long time. So I think it's a good idea to disabuse ourselves of this idea that our government's just going to be there and give us, in good faith, all of the information that we feel we want. I just doubt that that's the case.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just one of those situations where we want to have more, but it seems like this, oh God, military-industrial complex, this, if you want to call it, national security state of America, has been constructed around going ahead and keeping us from the truth as much as possible.
Well, we have to join the club because I think most nations in history have been not radically different from that. Americans like to think that we have something different, and so we had very high hopes. We're very idealistic. You can even say utopian, and perhaps that might make us easier to fool.
Yeah.
Just a thought. Just a thought. We expect things to be a certain way, and they're generally not. I mean, America runs an empire.
Yeah, that is true. And anything they can do to keep things under their control, they're going to do it. So away from government into the scientific community, do you think the scientific community itself is given enough attention to USOs?
No, I mean, certainly not. I think the scientific community is not given enough attention to UAP or UFOs in general. I mean, look, until just a couple of years ago, the universal response was ignoring it and ridiculing it and just dismissing it as naive and foolishness. Only in the last couple of years have some scientists decided, well, let's look at this a little bit. Now, it won't ruin my career if I look at it now, so I can afford to. I mean, that's essentially, I think, what it is. So they have a long, long learning curve ahead of them. That's the thing about the UFO subject. You find this with scientists a lot. They think, just show me the proof, show me the evidence, show me this. Well, you don't realize until you get into it, this is a very tricky subject, and it's a steep learning curve. This is a phenomenon that is more intelligent than we are. And we don't like to admit that. Scientists, the ideal of science is, I'm going to take this little thing, I'm going to put it under my microscope, and I'm going to control this experiment. So I'm the one in charge of the experiment. But what if you're not the smartest person in the experiment, and the thing you're trying to study is smarter than you and has decided it doesn't really want you to examine it all that carefully, that it will do that on its terms, which I think is what we're dealing with. So in that case, the rules of science may not apply as readily as we might want to think. And I think scientists, the ones that I have spoken to, and I don't want to generalize too much, but my impression is that they think this is a lot easier a subject than it actually is, and that they can just come on in, master it. I mean, look, 30 years ago, honestly, I had a similar arrogance about this. I thought, I'll study this for a couple of months, and I'll figure it out. If this is real, is this BS? What do I think? And my famous last words, I was down the rabbit hole and never got out.
Yeah, it seems like it. Oh my gosh. There's just so much information to delve into and just so many places to find the details, but you are so good at digging in and finding the truth on that. Now, are there any current investigative efforts by you there, or anyone that are focused specifically on USOs? I mean, I should say besides you, yeah.
Well, well, a couple of things. So my investigation, I don't want to overstate what I do. I'm not going out in the ocean with sonar equipment and hunting USOs. I'm not doing that. I stay at home. I hunt around. I scour the web. I purchase out-of-print books. I read them. I put them together. So that's my research, and I speak to people. So I mean, I do that as well. Other people who are doing USO research, no, I'm not aware of anyone who's actively going out there really looking for them. I mean, there have been furtive attempts in the recent past. I don't know what they've really come up with. I have hopes that we're getting to a point where our own like civilian-based technology is perhaps becoming good enough that we can actually do some USO hunting. There's civilian groups out now that are able to use cameras and AI algorithms to detect and identify known aerial objects and identify unknown, or at least potential unknown aerial objects. I know that's out there. And I think, we've got some of the pieces in place to do this with the water to some extent, maybe at least close to the coastline, but we've got the ability to detect different types of sonar signals, and we've got software that can identify what those signals might mean. And, whether it's whales or whether it's a Russian submarine or, whatever. So I think, maybe in the next decade or so, it's entirely possible that there might be some good civilian efforts to actually hunt some of these objects in our waters. I think that would be great.
Yeah, I guess we have to get a bunch of nuclear material together to go ahead and act as a lure to bring them out.
From Elizondo's book, yeah. Wasn't that something? Well, that was a crazy statement there.
Well, it's just something you think about. What attracts them? I mean, I've seen scatter maps of UFO sightings, for instance, from Gaipan coming out of France. And anywhere there's any nuclear material, whether it's for medical, whether it's for industrial, or it's for nuclear power plants, or it's waste material, there is a cluster around each one of those particular sites wherever there is any kind of nuclear material. It just seems one of those things, if they like it, the way I see it is they look at the stuff and it's like, oh my God, I can't believe they're using this stuff. It's like looking at a train wreck. They can't stop looking at it potentially.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you on that. I just saw an online comment, some random, someone said about me, well, I don't really know if I like the fact that Richard is speculating so much on these alien intentions as if he would know what they are. And it's kind of true. I mean, I can't pretend that I know what they're thinking, but I will say I like to try to think about it from their point of view. And in fact, over the last 5+ years, I find myself just instinctively doing that more and more. I think I'm trying to see things the best that I can from the point of view of what they might be thinking. They meaning these non-human intelligences. And one thing that I certainly is clear is they have a very definite interest in our nuclear weapons and technology, as you were indicating. That's absolutely no question about this. And we've known this for years, and we've known this statistically. There's been a number of studies on this, actually. But beyond that, I think they're interested in our technology and our trajectory. I mean, honestly, how could someone not be? We've gone for thousands and thousands and thousands of years in a certain way, relatively low tech. And in the last couple of centuries only, now we think 200 years ago is a long time ago, but it's actually not that long ago. And suddenly, we've discovered scientific principles. We've discovered in a sophisticated way how to manipulate this planet of ours and how to dominate it pretty fast, really just a few generations, where we learned to send electronic signals through telegraph and then, trains and aerial balloons. And then suddenly we invent airplanes, and we get cars and radio and atomic bombs and computers and artificial intelligence and strong AI. I mean, just in a couple of generations. It's like a transformation of our world. And I've got to think, if there's any intelligence that has the ability to observe us, I ask myself, how could they not find that riveting, fascinating? Because we're actually more like them than not, in my opinion. We think about things abstractly. We have science. We do a lot of what they do, just at a lower level. And I have to think they recognize this. So I think that they're watching us.
Yeah.
And if they're here for the long term, they also know, okay, so these humans, they observe everything. They're also very aggressive and territorial. We can see that. They also love to have wars with each other. We can see that. And they're kind of maybe, nosing their way into our space if they're in the oceans, which is what it looks like, in a very brief period of time, putting in sonar detection and other kinds of weapon systems and nuclear submarines. Like, they should be interested in what we're doing. And that's my assumption, that they are very carefully monitoring us.
If we're cohabitating with them on technically their planet, because if you look in the mirror, probably you'll see an alien hybrid like I do on a regular basis. They've been around here for a longest period of time. And you said this earlier in the conversation, but it kind of comes down to, where is the safest place on the planet behind you on the map, or behind us on the globe, that you could possibly go? It's like the humans at this point are like the three little pigs in their house of sticks or house of wood up on the surface of the planet. Every 12,000 years, give or take, and it's been about 12,000 years since it's happened, the oceans rise up, clean off the surface, and it gets a reset. And where is the safest place to go on the planet? Well, under the bedrock, under the ocean that has all this pressure, and it's not going to move around that much. And plus, the hairless monkeys who have figured out how to use nuclear weapons these days, they can't get to us at that location.
Yeah. I think that's interesting, and that could very well be true. You bring up a point. I've often, in fact, you asked about the Columbus sighting, and we talked about some early sightings. And the truth is, I tried looking for the earliest really good USO cases that I could find. I wasn't trying to limit myself to the last couple of centuries, but I wasn't able to find a really great USO case that at least really convinced me that was from ancient times. There are some good UFO cases, aerial cases, that do convince me from ancient times. At least I think so. I'm not saying the phenomenon wasn't there, but the water-based aspect of it, I've not really found anything that I can say, absolutely, I believe this. Maybe some possible ones. I'm not saying that they weren't in the ocean, but I'm not at a point where I can say definitively, yes, I know they've been in our oceans for a very long time. Maybe. I can't rule it out, but I just, I don't know.
Well, one of the first rumored, if we want to even look at it, potential interactions between our military and USOs is when Admiral Byrd took his fleet down to Antarctica. Supposedly came back limping.
Yeah. I don't know about that.
Yeah.
Last Operation High Jump.
Yeah.
Man, I feel like I'm a debunker tonight. I'm not trying to debunk everything.
Oh,
but
not a problem.
The Byrd story is another one. I'm just, I'm not sure about it.
And the Byrd stuff, talking about, I'm going into a hollow earth. If I was going through some kind of a portal that came to another world, you would think you're going down into the earth, but you're coming out someplace else. But you know what? Time will tell. And maybe if we get some good disclosure news and, if it's part of the record, maybe we can get some answers on it. But until
then, from his alleged journals, I think, if I'm not mistaken. And I remember reading them thinking, there's a lot of exclamation points in these journals. I don't know. Seemed a little, I didn't find it believable. That was just me.
That's fine.
And, the thing about the Antarctica thing, I'll just point out, is like a year or so after, he hightailed it out there with a bloody nose, apparently, we sent exploration parties right back there. So, I mean, if we were warned off, it's like, why did we go back right there? And doesn't seem to be any problem. So I don't know. I'm just, I'm not really sure what I think about the Admiral Byrd story.
Yeah.
That he ran into aliens.
It makes sense, my friend. I'm just bringing it up because it's part of the historical record. So I guess next question coming to you, talking about USOs and modern UAP discussions. How do you think USOs fit into the modern conversation about UAP?
Well, I think they need to be part of it, because this is a very, very important aspect of the broader UAP phenomenon. I think there's no question. I don't know if I can say that they are a majority of where the action is. Sometimes people think that. To me, it seems like a significant minority. but it's important. For example, I think there's at least a reasonable supposition that they actually do have bases down in the oceans. And I would be surprised, frankly, if there wasn't one somewhere near the Puerto Rico Trench, which is north of that island, very deep. There's a lot of reason to think there's some action there. Also off by Catalina Island and a number of other places where I think there are very likely bases. And I'm just saying likely. I can't say that I know this, but there's almost 70% of all the cases that I uncovered were of transmedium craft. That is, craft that were either entering or emerging from the water. In fact, a slight majority of those were emerging from the water, which is just the craziest thing to be seen coming out of the water and then zipping off somewhere. And I keep asking, where are they coming from? What are they, what are they doing down there? It seems to me that there must be a base. I could be wrong. Maybe they're just using the water for, I don't know, fuel or some other thing. But they're out there in the most remote areas, often interacting with our technology.
I'd have to go ahead and vote and say there are bases, plural. We just would have to wonder, how big is the actual population? How many crafts do they actually have? We see little things going on here or there. We could be completely overwhelmed by what's already here.
I often wonder, like, what is their population? What is their infrastructure like? Do they manufacture their craft here on Earth, or are they coming? Have they somehow defeated space-time constraints with their own version of the Alcubierre equation? We can do warp drive. And if they can do that, then maybe they don't need to have a base here. They can have their infrastructure wherever they come from, and speed of light's not a big deal for them. And if that is the case, that opens up a lot of different possibilities. We could be seeing a lot of them coming from their society. It doesn't have to be just a small group. I mean, we have no idea. I mean, I just speculate about this just like you do, but I do believe that it's very likely that they have figured things out that we have not figured out. Otherwise, like, how would there be so many of them? I love to study UFO reports. I do it all the time. And yes, I'm aware. Most of those raw reports are probably explainable in some conventional way, sure. But there's a lot of these reports. And you go through them, and at least when I go through them, at least 1 out of 10, and usually 1 out of 5 will make me just say, wow, like out loud. They're very, very good. Not that they've been investigated, all of them. I will grant that. But there's a lot of interesting things going on in this world. And there's a lot of these craft that seem to be everywhere. And if that is true, you have to ask, how many of them are here? Like, where are they based? And I mean, these are just questions that I don't have answers to, but I think studying the USOs has helped me a little bit in trying to get a handle on that.
Yeah. And I think for me, at least, it looks like I don't care about the military aspects. I don't care about how the craft work. Why are they here, and what are they doing here are some of the two most biggest questions I think almost everyone would want to know.
I agree with you. And fortunately, I love to speculate about this. And again, it's just speculation. I think there's a number of really great attractions of our world, of course. We have a lot of life. And we don't just have like a little bit of life. We are like a super abundance of life. We've got jungles, with rainforests, and all kinds of plains, and even our deserts have life. And our oceans have life. That's another thing about us. We have land and ocean. Like, this could be just a water world, really, but we have just enough water that there's land that can be above it. You have marine life and you have land life. It's like a tremendous variety. We're really, really lucky. We hit the jackpot. And then on top of that, one species developed the ability to communicate with complex language and develop abstract thought and manipulate its environment, because we got these great opposable thumbs. So there's us. And then there's just all of the genetic diversity and resources of this planet that would have to be an attraction. So I think, all the liquid water that's just right there. I mean, We have minerals that are close to the surface of the planet, which is unusual from what I understand. Most rocky planets, my understanding is that their heavier minerals are toward the center, but in our case, we had an impact from the planet that eventually ended up as our moon, and there's a lot of heavy metals near the crust, which means that we can create an industrial infrastructure. So we got like a lot of cool things here. So it's an attractive place for them. But I tend to believe that the main attraction is us. And I know that sounds like, oh, maybe I'm thinking too much of humanity, but I don't think so. I think, if anything, we have a tendency to think down of the value of our species. And I think a visiting intelligence would see us, and they would see that we are on a path, and that path is going to lead us probably right into their world. How soon will it be before we have truly like very strong AI combined with, I don't know, some version of quantum computing or something beyond even that I can't even imagine? Like we're doing all these crazy, impossible things very rapidly. So if I'm them, I've got to be thinking, these humans, they don't stop. They keep going. They're intensely curious. They're very assertive. We're going to keep an eye on them. And there might be some of them that might think, yeah, they're a real pain, and maybe we would be better off without them. Like, is that an impossible thought? I don't think that's an impossible thought. Maybe there's some that like us. Maybe there's some that don't like us. I mean, we need a scorecard for sure, and we don't have a good one. But I do tend to think that there are a lot of them here. They have some kind of rule by which they've decided we're not going to let them know officially that we're here. We're not going to do that. That might mess us up. Could easily mess us up. I mean, you think about it. It's like we tend to think, yes, we want to know who the aliens are. Take me on your ship. I want to meet you. Do we really think that we're able to handle that? I often wonder. They're probably a lot smarter than us. They probably read our thoughts. They may be part of a hive mind themselves, so their collective IQ is very high. Maybe they won't laugh at all of our jokes. Maybe they might look down on us a little bit and think, like they're assessing us. I don't know if we would be all that comfortable with that. I don't know if I would be comfortable sitting across one in a room, one-on-one, eyeball to eyeball.
Was it usually three on one though, but usually three.
But I'm just saying, I think, they might be thinking, we'll hold back. We don't want them to interact with us for a variety of reasons. That would not be difficult for me to understand. And I suspect that's the case. I suspect that they're here. What's they're doing here is important for them. They've expended a certain amount of their own resources, their own version of money, perhaps, and they're here, and they do not want us, at least en masse, interacting with them. That's the impression that I get.
Yeah. Well, they're very evasive. They hide in the shadows. They only show to the people they want to have, and it's just, yeah, it's been, it's not like we've got them landing in mass in front of, the White House in 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue or Times Square in New York or downtown LA. It seems to be in remote locations, and it's like we almost need one of those mass sightings to come down. If we're going to bring it down a UFO Jake Barber style, don't bring it down at some remote place in the desert. Do it in a place where we can get a lot of people to see it all at once.
Yeah, it's like, for years I used to ask myself, what are their motivations? What do they think? And then I think one day I just thought, well, why don't I just base my assessment on the behaviors that we know they have already engaged in. And their behaviors, as you just said, are by and large evasive for the most part. They're curious. They're evasive. They're sometimes invasive. Let's just put that out there. This isn't a USO thing, but this is something that I'm fascinated by, is this phenomenon of like black triangles hovering at 200 feet over some neighborhood in the dead of night. What's that all about? What are they doing? It sounds like, what are they doing? An abduction? Maybe. They do things like this. They're very, very stealthy. They're very, they don't want to be observed, it seems to me, at least for the most part. And yet they're doing things. I mean, if you talk to people who've had abduction or alleged abduction experiences, I've talked to many. Many of those people are quite believable to me. They're quite credible, I think. So at least one group or more than one group are very likely interacting with people in a much more personal way. And that's important too. So, you know, they do what they want, it seems like.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. And so it kind of comes down to, we're seeing a lot of different stuff with USOs. You know, some people, it could be evidence of non-human intelligence. Others think it could be advanced technology from secret military projects.
Yeah, maybe. I don't think so. I think some of these things are just way too advanced, in my opinion. It's way too advanced. And this is why I like looking at the old stories, the really early ones, like that one from 1825 that I mentioned, the glowing thing that comes out of the ocean, or one from 1870, which is I also have in this book. This isn't specifically a USO per se, but it was an aerial sighting over the middle of the Atlantic Ocean by a steamship that was out there between Brazil and North Africa. Any direction they would have looked, it would have been about 1,000 miles of water. So they're there, and it's getting late in the day, but it's still light, and they see this craft fly over them. The 1870s, nothing's supposed to be over there. And the captain actually drew a picture of it, which was reproduced by Charles Fort, who was a great pioneering researcher 100 years ago. Fort drew it, and I actually reproduced it in my book, but it's a roundish disc with segments on it and a little tail that kind of came in like a hook. And whatever it was below cloud level. The whole crew saw it. Captain wrote about it. What technology could that be? You're over in the middle of the Atlantic. So I'm not saying that there are no advanced technologies today that could confuse us and make us wonder, did we make that? Did the aliens do that? Sure. But the reality is that there's been a long enough history, at least in my opinion, of highly sophisticated technology. I don't know how to explain that in terms of black budget anything. When you're going back, you know, especially pre-1940s, but even in like 1950s and 1960s, these things are transmedium. They're coming out of the water. I strongly do not think that we had anything that was transmedium. I don't think we have anything transmedium today, but I definitely think we didn't back in the 1960s and 50s. So it's a tough argument. I would say, sure, there's always a possibility that some of these sightings are experimental tech. But when I look over the USO cases that I included in the 3 volumes, I really try to account for that. And I just, if I thought that something was human tech, I certainly didn't include it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my favorite case, I know it's not out of the realm of your first book, though, but it'll be in your second or third edition, is the case that happened in Aguadilla, Puerto Rico, 2014.
Yeah. Aguadilla. Absolutely. I have a long treatment of that for the 3rd volume, without a doubt. That was a thermal cam. It was 2013 Aguadilla, which is the northwest corner of that island. Puerto Rico is like a big rectangle, basically, and it's right there. And that, I agree, that is a heck of a case. And you know, we've been even learning more and more things about it over time. There's a really good documentary by a buddy of mine, Darcy Weir, who did a piece on it not long ago, where they interviewed the guy who actually, did he record it? No, he did. He was there on the scene when that was recorded.
You saw one of the recordings, yeah.
Yeah, you saw the same thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's a great case. And in fact, Aguadilla has a number of really interesting accounts. There's one from 1990 that will be in the 3rd volume as well, of a fisherman who was a diver in that area. He did both, and he saw this. He saw a craft of some sort below the water, not far from his boat. He was a couple of miles off the coast, and he had diving equipment with him. He actually went into the water And according to his testimony, he touched this craft. He put his hand on it. And his description of it was quite remarkable. It was a disc-shaped craft. And he said it had these weird kind of vents, whereas on one part of it, if you put your hand there, it was like sucking the water in. And on the other end, it was pushing water out. It was like almost like a filtration system of some sort. He got a little scared, and he went back to his boat and gathered himself together, went back in a second time, and it was not there.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I remember a story from Ted Rowe, who is the one of the founders of NARCAP. He was talking about he deals with a bunch of free divers, and off of the Big Island, they were going, and sorry about the dog barking. He was going, and one of the free divers went down, and as they were going down and swimming around, there were a pot of dolphins around. They actually came across a saucer that was underwater. There were a bunch of dolphins that were all up close, like almost like they were interacting with it. But as the free diver tried to get closer to the saucer, they felt like something like jellyfish stings going all over the body. And the closer they got to it, the more that sensation happened, to where they had to turn around and leave. But yeah, there's a lot of really interesting stories about USOs.
That's fascinating. You know, I'm gonna reach out to Ted. I really like Ted, and I respect his work so much. He's done such great work for so long, and I want to get that story, and if I can, include it in one of my upcoming volumes. Yeah. It won't be part of my statistical analysis. That's done, but I can still put it in there.
He's got another one where he goes to this, he has an ability to go to this old religious site, like a temple that they have. It's by this bay with waterfalls and stuff coming down. And at this particular location, the native Hawaiians are familiar with these orbs coming up out of the water and going up along a cliff and then shooting off. And he was actually there to see one of them. But the interesting thing was, when this orb came up out of the water didn't move. It just literally rose up out of it. But inside the orb, he could see a saucer shape.
That's quite fascinating. And I'm definitely going to reach out, because I want that story. I think it's worthy. It's a worthwhile story. We should all be hearing it. It's interesting you mentioned water not being affected sometimes by these objects, if I heard you right.
Yeah.
And that is definitely one other aspect of this. Not every time, but many times witnesses will say, like, I was shocked that when this entered the water, there was no splash, no nothing. Or when it exited the water, there was no splash, no nothing. You know, and it's possible that it has something to do with whatever kind of field or ionization that may be around the craft. That's the best theory that I've heard.
Well, if you look at it like a gravitational warp field that goes around the craft, when the craft are moving through the air or moving through the water, they're not moving in the water, they're not moving in the air. Their reality literally warps around the craft, so the normal encumbrances like we would have or anything else that's moving within it are taken back. It's kind of like when we had with the Tic Tacs, where they dropped down from 60,000 feet, give or take, down to 50 feet in a fraction of a second, moving 57,000 miles per hour at that account. They never broke the sound barrier. There was no boom. There was no fireball or anything. It's because, well, kind of like what we even see in Aguadilla, when they're going in the water and coming back out, they're not affected by our normal physics. It's almost like there's
exactly. Yeah. I think that's a great way to describe it. I think you did a perfect description there. They're able to create a kind of bubble around them. And within that bubble, they're able to go through these medium of water and air much more easily, apparently. You know, I think we're going to get to the point before very long that we actually get the science of this kind of out in the open. I think there's been a lot of really good theoretical work on this over the years. Miguel Alcubierre and Eric Davis and Hal Puthoff are some of the people who I know have been really working on these ideas. And it seems to me that maybe they've made the breakthrough and it's already published, but I have a feeling it's a big one's going to happen, and we're going to have this figured out.
Absolutely. Now, talking about the science and stuff, has anyone tried to put together any physics behind the whole transmedium travel piece?
Not to my knowledge, no. I mean, probably someone has. I don't know who they are. But, you know, I try to be at least acquainted as a layperson. I'm certainly no scientist or expert with what people like Puthoff or Davis or others may have to say about, like, the physics of how these craft do what they do. I mean, I just try to keep up and understand that to the best of my ability, and I'm a novice, so it would be hard for me to comment on it. But I'm sure there are people out there trying to figure this out, without a doubt.
Oh gosh, absolutely. Getting a little bit deep in this, why not? Is there any evidence that USOs have bases under the oceans?
I wouldn't say evidence, but I think there's good reason to suspect it. So there are a number of researchers over the years who have absolutely believed there are bases in certain places. Off the coast of South America, definitely has been speculated to be a base. I mentioned the Black Sea earlier, and there have been Russian and Ukrainian researchers over the last several decades who have believed this also. There are definitely reasons to believe there's a base somewhere near Catalina Island and somewhere near Puerto Rico, and I think other places. Evidence is a hard one to speak to, though. You know, when a craft emerges from a body of water, is that evidence that there's a base down there? Well, maybe. I mean, maybe they're just hanging out down there and there's not a base. So I don't know. But there are areas where there's a lot of activity, and I might think that that's indicative of a base. And, you know, it could be that in time we'll be able to develop our own equipment and get some ROVs down there with some cameras and some sensory equipment and start looking more seriously. But right now, it's very tough to say. I suspect that there are, but that's as far as I can go.
You know, it's almost, I would almost would hope they would, I would hope that they would have a protocol that says thou shall not surface directly above a base.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe they do that. I don't know. I mean, I really honestly wonder.
Yeah.
One thing I can say, and in fact, I want to say this because on this program, because I know you guys are friends with my illustrator, the illustrator of this book, who is Alan Levine, who's a friend of mine and someone who I just have tremendous respect for and regard for. And I just want to have a moment to say he illustrated this book in such a beautiful way, as well as the upcoming second and third volumes. He did such a great service, and I'm so grateful to him for that. He helped bring a lot of these cases to life. And the reason that I say this is, I mean, he deserves to get the credit for this, of course, but these cases, in my opinion, the most important thing about them is the human connection to this incredible unknown. That's something that I try to convey in writing up these cases, and it is something that he really conveyed in his illustrations. So when you look at these pictures, it's typically like there's the craft, but there's a person watching the craft. And, you know, for the most part, like here's one he did of the ghost rockets of 1946. Some of those over the country of Sweden, mostly, a lot of those objects went into the water. And Alan did this, just amazing image of this woman standing on a pier watching this craft come down into a body of water. And he does this throughout, where here's one where Flambeau Lake in Wisconsin in 1950, the man's fishing. You can see, and there's a craft coming out of the water. And he had some very, very nice artistic ways of expressing these things, which I was just not expecting. So to me, it's like there's this human element to the experience that I just never want to lose sight of. These incredible things happen to people who didn't really know how to deal with them sometimes. They would just tell their friends, their community, and somehow it ends up in someone's report or someone's database, and then it gets forgotten. And so his illustrations were a really important part of just fleshing out this story and hammering home the reality that this isn't just some abstract thing of these objects, you know, traversing the oceans or the skies of our world. They're interacting with human beings who are observing and just as mystified about them as you could imagine. I was very grateful for that, and I just wanted to get the opportunity to give Alan the shout out.
Oh God, yeah. You know, the way I say it is, a picture is worth 1,000 words, and 1,000 words without any pictures is worth a lot of confusion. And Alan definitely delivered on this. Absolutely.
He absolutely did. It was amazing.
You know, just, you know, little side quest here. Have you done research, or it can be covered in your books, the RCMP officer James Blackwood, who had a interesting UFO case where he had a sighting in 1978 in St. John's, Canada?
Offhand, I'm not remembering that. Is that a water-based case, or is that
It's a water-based case, yeah. It was in the bay. They had a UFO that came up out of the water, and he came up with his patrol car. There's interviews of him on television, the whole thing back at the time when it happened. He's an amazing guy. He's known as the Raccoon Whisperer on YouTube. He's dealing with some health issues and stuff right now, but he's a legend in his own time just because of what he experienced. And he was even talking about how when he had his lights on, that the UFO itself was going and matching the light cycle that he had going on his car.
It's not too late for me to get that in there. So thanks. I will incorporate that into the second volume. By the way, the 1970s, you know, it's an amazing thing. Like, the more I do this, no matter how many cases I find, there are absolutely cases that I've missed. So I'm grateful for this. I really appreciate it. I should have called you before when I was doing the research, and I could have held these cases from you.
Oh, I've been scouring the ocean floors for the longest time. I've had a gut instinct about them being under the bases of our, you know, having bases underneath our oceans going back, oh gosh, 30 plus years at this point.
Oh man.
But yeah, it's
I just wanted to say, when you were mentioning the case from St. John's in Canada, it took place in the 1970s, and my first volume doesn't cover the 1970s, but my second volume certainly does. And that decade, for reasons that I would still like to know for sure, was the most crazy active decade of USO sightings that of any decade. And this is all pre-internet, but it didn't seem to matter. It's just tons of cases reported, and high levels of like really invasive cases of like a lot of electromagnetic interference, way higher percentage than the norm in that decade. That was the decade that the UFO or USO encounters, I should say, started appearing nearly all at night, whereas previous to that, it was 50-50 day and night. Something happened by the 1970s, and there is a ramping up of behavior, of activity, nighttime activity, electromagnetic interference, all of it. And then it tapered off by, during the 1980s, it tapered off to some extent.
Yeah.
The 2010s, by the way, were an active decade, but the 1970s were the most, and I don't know why. Is it just that I got lucky in those the cases that I found, or is there something really happening? I do know in UFO history, the 1970s were a very, very busy time as well. And again, you know, here I am, I get into the habit of trying to speculate about these aliens, but I just wonder, like, there has to be a story there. There has to be a reason why the activity ramped up as it did during that time, and I would like to know.
Yeah. Here's a picture that was put together based on James Blackwood accounting of what had happened. He's got his police car down in the corner and the whole thing, and talking about the craft that was hanging out over the water and his interaction with it.
That's awesome. I love that. Well, I clearly need to incorporate that into the next volume, which fortunately I can still do, since that won't be published in another month or two. So I can get that in there.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me get back to the questions I've prepared here really quick. Where go all of a sudden? Here we go. Okay, so let me get back to figure out where I was. I just brought that up. You know, could USOs be related to historical myths about underwater civilizations?
Well, I'd have to find out what some of those myths are and where they're from. I mean, again, as I was saying earlier, I just wasn't finding the kind of strong evidence that I wanted to find for ancient USO sightings. So I don't know. I wouldn't know how to answer that. I would never say no. I would say that if anything, I'm still woefully ignorant. I mean, despite spending the last 3 years looking at this phenomenon, the subject is a great teacher, and it can really humble you because, at least me, because I realize there's so much more that I still need to know. So whether I could connect this to ancient myths or not, I'm just going to have to take a pass on that one.
Well, that's fine. Absolutely. First question. That's good. Okay, so here's the next question. How do you think researchers could better document and analyze USO activity?
Well, you want to be methodical about it. You want to be thorough and complete. So, the best documentation is thorough and complete documentation, including as much as you're able to include. One thing that I noted in going back over a lot of these old cases, I tried to create a list of identifying factors about every single case. So it was about 15 of them. So like, did it make any sound? What was the sound? What color was it? What shape was it? What was its relationship to the water? Was it below the water? Did it emerge from the water? Did it enter the water? This type of thing. Was it sucking up water? What was the distance of the witness to the object? What did the object appear to have an interest in the witness? This is something that I monitored. I tried to figure out. There are a lot of things like this where there are different types of effects. What were those effects? So my first advice would be, you want to be as complete as possible. One thing I noticed is that a lot of people did not comment on whether or not the craft that they saw made a sound. Presumably it didn't, or maybe they would have made a comment to that effect. But a majority of witnesses, when I read over the old cases, did not mention, did this craft make any noise or not? I mean, you would think that's something that you want to know, and yet a lot of that information is just not there. So there's a lot of incomplete information. So I think the best thing that any witness could do, or any investigator could do, is you want to be as absolutely meticulously thorough as you can. And then if you're doing this with regularity, you need a system. You want to be methodical about it. What I ended up doing, which I had no intention or expectation when I started, was I created a spreadsheet. And I'll tell you right now, I am not a spreadsheet guy. This was my first spreadsheet that I actually created, and it was massive. It was humongous. I can't believe it when I look at it. It's free, by the way, and anyone can download it. It's 37 pages. It's very large, but you can go through it. And I try to have a glossary. But the point is, I created that spreadsheet based on the categories that I set up for every single case. So I tried to be very methodical about this. And it was only once I had the data organized that I was able to see patterns that I would never have noticed otherwise. And so I would say that what an investigator needs to do is be as absolutely meticulously thorough and methodical as they can be, and write all that data down so that it can be collated with the other cases, and we can start looking for some patterns, because the patterns are there.
Patterns tell stories, my friend.
Yeah, this is what I learned in the course of doing this, and I hadn't really expected that. I mean, I'll give you a couple of examples if you don't mind.
Oh, go for it.
Day versus night sightings. I've mentioned this. This is a big thing that I made out of in my book. I was kind of shocked by this. So one of the things that I tried to note was the sighting in daylight or at night. It's a very simple. Like I didn't put it down to like what hour was it? Was it at 2:30 in the afternoon? A lot of the cases didn't give that level of detail, but I could tell if they were in the daytime or at night. So I thought, okay, great. I'll write that down. And what I noticed is that right up until the late 1960s, a slight majority of all USO cases that I had collected occurred in the daytime, like 51%, but a little bit of a majority. After that, I feel as if it was a dramatic transformation. 75%, almost instantly, they were occurring at night. And that is, I can't see that as a random fluke event. It seems to me that there was a change in behavior of these objects, of these craft. And another thing that I noticed, I mentioned electromagnetic interference earlier, and I'll just mention it here. So The first EM case that I had, that I recorded, the USOs, was in the early 1950s. So starting from then until the present, nearly 10% of all the USO cases that I've collected have electromagnetic interference in one form or another, 9.5% actually. So almost 1 out of 10. But what's interesting is that percentage is doubled when you get into military encounters. So it's twice as likely. Again, I don't think that's by chance. And then it's 4 times as likely if there are allegations of missing time, which there are a few, or sightings of beings. So if you had missing time or sightings of being in connection with a USO, you would be 4 times more likely than the average to have electromagnetic interference. In other words, your electronic equipment goes dead, or your compass goes crazy, or something like that. Or if you're an aircraft carrier, your weapon systems don't work, or your communications go offline, because that happens. So there are certain patterns in this data that some might be predictable, but others are not predictable. Like one predictable one is that when people see triangular USOs, they are invariably black in color. And you do get a lot of black triangles. But again, I just think that's noteworthy that we're seeing this consistency in the reporting by these people. And when I see patterns like that, that gives me some confidence that we're probably getting decent data that is probably accurate.
Yeah, absolutely. Finishing off the chapter on the book here, kind of, what do you hope readers take away from your first volume of A History of USOs?
Well, the main thing I want, honestly, I want people to love this half as much as I loved writing it. I know that sounds crazy, but there's a lot going on in these cases. These are amazing stories that are human stories, describing a human encounter with something that's just basically inexplicable. That's one thing that I just want. I designed this book so that if you want to just pick it up at random, you can just read a case and you can close it up and go about your way. The other thing that I did here, though, that was important is I tried to, for each chapter, I mean, it goes in a kind of chronological manner. So I broke it into periods of time. And I wrote historical overviews to provide context of what was going on in the world during that particular period, whether just geopolitically in terms of the world, or technologically in terms of human development, or in terms of the UFO phenomenon in general, what was happening. I tried to, in other words, give a proper, appropriate context to the sightings. Part of that context is our own technology and our own capability of detecting ocean-based or water-based anomalies. So that was something that I was glad to do. I didn't just want it to be one story after another. I wanted to provide a kind of provide some understanding to this. And then the other thing, as I was sort of indicating just a moment ago, is the statistics that I was shocked by how much was there and how much I wrote about it. So I wrote a 35-page appendix, Appendix B, which is a data analysis of all of those statistics. So there's a lot in there, and I think it's worth reading. It might be more for the nerds than for the general public, but I think there's a lot of people who would want to read some of those statistical outcomes because, again, they tell a story. So there's a lot in here. There's a lot. It's a multifaceted book. I'm very pleased to have written it, and I'll be even more pleased when the other 2 volumes come out in the very near future. I got this book available as a hardcover, as a paperback, and as an ebook. Within a few weeks, the volume 1 will be available as an audiobook as well. And I've got a really wonderful reader working on that. So
I was going to ask if you actually did the narration yourself, but you've got a great reader doing it. Nice.
Well, here's the thing. I did narrate one of my books, UFOs for the 21st Century Mind. It was 500 pages. That was a lot of work.
Oh, yeah.
I did it. I'm glad I did it. It sounds good. I'm actually finishing the narration for an even longer book that I wrote, which was my second volume of UFOs and the national security state, which has been in print for 15, 16 years. Never been an audiobook. That book actually broke 2 audiobook readers. It was too long. They couldn't do it. So I'm doing it. But this USO history, like, people have to understand, I would love to be able to do it. Amazon will not let me do a cloned voice for it, at least not yet. They don't allow that. So I can either use one of theirs or I can hire someone. And we've got a human reader who's really good. And it's better because this way it at least will get done.
Yeah, absolutely.
If I were to do it, it would take forever.
Yeah, and some people think we're done. No, we still got some questions to go on here, my friend. Getting on into the conversation about just general disclosure and everything and what's been going on within the sphere of disclosure over the last, well, recently. Who would you want to testify as a whistleblower that hasn't appeared yet before Congress?
Oh. I don't want to put these people on the spot. But, well, you know, I would like to see Hal Puthoff testify.
Well, heck yeah.
I like and respect Hal very much. He's been very kind to me over many years, and I have just only respect for him. But I think he would be a great person to testify. He's a man who knows a lot. He knows a lot, and in fact, he's said more and more publicly over the last few years, and I think that there's a great deal. Another one would be Eric Davis, his colleague. Dr. Eric Davis, I think, would be an outstanding person to testify over some of the things that he's known. You know, he worked with Barbara Bigelow at the Bigelow Ranch for years when it was the Skinwalker Ranch. And but he's gone so far beyond that. And, you know, he's one of these people that everyone has said, like, he is almost honest to a fault. He cannot deceive, at least that's what they say. He's a brilliant man, and he knows a lot. So I think those would be two people I would love to see testify.
Can I add Bob Bigelow to that list?
Oh, yeah, for sure. For sure.
Because he's the one who would say, I don't freaking care. Here's the truth.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, he gave that incredible interview to, what was it, 60 Minutes in early 2017 before the kind of the dam broke, as it were. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I mean, he's telling it to someone who clearly is incredulous at the things he was saying. It's like, I know we're being visited. I know they're walking among us. You know, Bigelow, he has a certain amount of FU money, I think, and he just doesn't care. Yeah. Like he's at this point in his life where he can just say, this is what I know. If you don't believe me, I don't really care.
It's your own fault, but this is how it is. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it would be great to see him testify. It'd be perfect. I think there's a lot of good people in those circles who would be very, very worthwhile to testify. But those are several that I would love to see.
Yeah.
Whether that will happen, I have no idea.
No, but yeah, Hal Puthoff, because he can't talk about it, but Pal has some unfortunate family close ties to the non-human intelligence and how dangerous it could potentially be. And, you know, my heart goes out to him.
Well, yeah, those are things that he hasn't told me personally, but I wouldn't say no to that.
Yeah.
What's definitely true is that he's, along with Kit Green, who might be another interesting person to testify, he might have the record for the most years holding a TS-SCI clearance, top secret sensitive compartment information clearance. At least this is the word. More than 50 years, at least, that he's probably had that. He knows a lot of things.
Get the information before we lose them. That would be wonderful. Unfortunately, we just lost Harold Malmgren, who had a lot of close ties to disclosure as well, and he will definitely be missed. Yeah.
And we lose them all the time. We're fighting against the clock and against the cemeteries.
Oh yeah, absolutely. If I could ask next question, what is your take on the new task force put together with Representative Luna, which has undertaken the declassification of JFK, RFK, MLK, talking about UFOs, 9/11 COVID origins, and a bunch of other topics?
Well, I mean, I think it's great. I totally support investigating these things. All of those, every single one of those things, I am on board with doing a genuine investigation. And I've heard her say that, you know, she's very certain that there were two shooters for JFK. Yeah, like no kidding. But I'm glad to hear someone in Congress say that. So that's all of that is wonderful. The problem, of course, is they have like, supposedly 6 months to do this, and you just have to wonder, are they being set up to fail?
Yeah.
And I hope not, because it's a tall order to do all of that. Some of this has been done already. The JFK part was actually done in 1975. We had been known as the church hearings, the church committee, Frank Church of Idaho. They did actually learn a lot about the JFK assassination. They concluded, by the way, that it was a conspiracy, that it was more than one gunman. They did all of that and then closed up shop and basically headed for the hills, and we never heard from them again. So maybe Nelson Rockefeller, vice president, had something to do with that. Hopefully this time it will be better, but my best case scenario is that they come up with at least one really important piece of data that we can talk about and agree to continue and do some follow-up. Because I just can't think that you're going to be able to get to the bottom of all of those things in 6 months.
Heck no, because their first hearing is going to be coming like March 26th at the end of the month. So that takes 1/5 of the time away with all these topics. And if all this information has to go in front of Trump for him to sign off on what they're going to release or not, there's some delays that could potentially go on. And like you're saying, I agree with you 100%. There's no way they can get this done in 6 months.
No, but if they can get like something that would just be new and dramatic and powerful, that would be worth it.
Yeah.
But Richard, they're going to extend the 6 months because they can do that as well. And what else is interesting is it's not just UAP that they're going to be investigating. For the very first time, they're going to include USOs in that, which I'm sure is going to be great for your books.
Well, that's really crazy. I mean, I started this 3 years ago, really not anticipating this amount of attention. So good timing on my part. But yes, I'm glad. I hope, and I thought that they might be able to do the extension after the 6 months. So you seem to know more about this than I do, but I certainly hope that they are able to do that.
Yeah.
Because like we just said, this is going to take a lot more than 6 months to cover all the information they have on their list. That goes without saying. Without
a doubt, yeah. So it's a good start, and let's just hope that, I wish them all the success. Absolutely. And I'm excited to hear what may turn up out of this.
Yeah, absolutely. Coming on to the next question, neither of the two previous hearings on UAP really moved the needle with the public. What recommendations would you have implemented to advance the UAP topic?
Well, I don't know if I would agree completely with that statement. I think, they weren't breaking the wall of disclosure with a sledgehammer. I'll agree with that. But there was very valuable information that came out in both of those hearings. And, I wouldn't say that they didn't accomplish anything. One of the things that struck me about the last hearing that I will not let go of this was the question that was asked of Lou Elizondo by Representative Burleson of Missouri, having to do with the claim. And I just spoke earlier today to George Knapp, who said, yes, this is absolutely true. The claim that in the early days of OSAP, so we're talking 2008-ish or so, that there was an attempt to get legacy exotic ET tech from Lockheed Martin to be transferred to Bigelow under the auspices of the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, and that this attempt happened twice, and that it was stopped both times by a senior agent at the CIA named Gaffney. And that's a pretty extraordinary claim. It was written up in an article by my friend Christopher Sharp, who's a very excellent young journalist on this, does great work. George Knapp knew this story. He confirmed it earlier today to me. And I just think this is a hell of a thing to investigate. So we've got a lot of things going on here. We have the claim that Lockheed Martin has ET tech, essentially. So can we please follow up on that? We have the claim that the CIA twice stepped in the way of preventing this transfer from occurring. Can we please have some more light shed on that? We hear again and again how the CIA just inserts itself into the UFO or UAP phenomenon, that it's been a guardian of the secrets. Well, here's a very prime example of that. And all of that was discussed in the last hearing. In fact, when Lou Elizondo was asked this by Burleson, he didn't deny it. In fact, he affirmed it. He just said, well, there's a lot that I can't say about that. But he didn't say, oh, that's BS, I don't believe it. No. So this is a really powerful lead that we can, I would like to think that we should be able to follow up on.
Oh, gosh, yeah. Especially now that we have the new head of the CIA as John Ratcliffe, who is someone who is, sounds like, at least from the last time he was in office as the Director of National Intelligence, is a staunch supporter of disclosure and bringing out the truth to the people.
Yes. I mean, he has made some very positive statements to that effect, and that's very, very, very positive development. I think Mike has just raised his hand.
Yeah.
Accidentally, I did that. It was my thumb.
My finger slipped.
Richard, you were the one that brought out the information publicly about the Eric Wilson memo, the notes.
Yeah.
You brought that out. And that delved right into the very topic we're talking about right now.
Yes, it does.
How the CIA blocked Admiral Wilson from getting information, and that unnamed aerospace company was Lockheed Martin. We know that now. And they were the ones that shut down a J2 member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, which is completely ridiculous. But this goes into that craft and the material that Bigelow was trying to get his hands on, and all the behind-the-scenes maneuvering that was going on from both Lockheed and the CIA, who they work hand-in-hand with together about UAPs. And you had that information. And it was something that, it was like a hot potato. No one wanted to break the notes from the Edgar Mitchell estate, but you finally came forward with that.
That's right. Yeah, boy, that was, I almost forgot all about that. That was 6 years ago, more than that. And honestly, I was very angry for a while at the response of most of the UFO community at that time. So many experienced researchers just ran away from that document. Others tried to debunk it and say it was false. And I put myself out there because I had stated, look, I was shown that document, several pages of it anyway, back in 2006. And in fact, I talked not about the document, but I talked about the information in that document for several years in various conferences after that. So I'm on the record for discussing it. A couple of interviews as well that I did where I discussed this event, and I mentioned Thomas Wilson. In fact, I called Thomas Wilson on the phone in late 2006, and that's a story I've told a few times, and he ended up hanging up on me. But anyway, I was on this story for a long, long time. So when the document was fully leaked, I was very disappointed in much of the community. They just seemed to be willing to debunk it, but not too afraid even to acknowledge that it was real. And I'm saying, I'm telling you people, this is real. But anyway, what's in the document is much more important than all of that. And you're absolutely right, Mike, to bring this up, because Thomas Wilson had the position of J2, which is his head of he was actually deputy head of intelligence at the time for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He was a very important man. It was actually Dr. Stephen Greer who in 1997 brought Edgar Mitchell and a few other people to meet with him, a Navy commander named Will Miller. And Greer was, he's absolutely right about this. He claimed that there were deep black programs that seemed to be beyond U.S. government control, that seemed to be dominated by private contractors. He had information about it. He brought it to Wilson's attention. He was able to do that. A nice score there. And Wilson said he would look into it. And he did look into it, and he was completely stymied. He needed help. Wilson did. We know this from the notes with his conversation with Davis. He needed help to figure out, how do I find these programs? One person who apparently helped him was former Secretary of Defense William Perry, and there were other people too. And Wilson finds not one, but several of these programs nested within other special access programs. And he contacts one of them first on the phone, and they're like, how the hell did you find us? He says, well, you've got this program to deal with alien technology, and It is your mistake that you did not allow me in for oversight because I should be overseeing this. And they said, well, we'll get back to you. And then they allowed him to meet with them. And one thing that I was told, and this is not actually in Davis's notes, but I was told by someone very close to Davis that one of the main reasons they wanted to meet Wilson was to find out how the hell he found out about them. That was like a big concern of theirs. But anyway, he meets with them and they tell him, we have a craft that was not made by man, not by human hands, in that phrase that Davis quoted. And Wilson, was very upset with them. He said, you need to bring me in. They said, no, we don't. I'll complain up the chain of command. They said, go, be our guest. We don't really care. We're not afraid of you. And these are the private contractors. They were, and Wilson did complain. And we know, you read the notes that in his conversation with Davis from 5 years later, he did complain and he was threatened with his career. So I think this does really tie together. And, the Lockheed connection was always suspected for a long, long time. And we've got the Lockheed there. We've got the legacy programs. There's probably a connection here with what was going on years later, 10 years later, when we get this whole attempt by Bigelow to try to get this technology. I'm sure there's a connection.
Tying it back to recent times and what's going on today in the political theater, do you think Trump and Musk are strong enough to break through this bureaucratic deep state that's been covering this stuff up?
It's a fantastic question. And, it's an amazing thing. I'm just going to put it out there. I want them to succeed here. I absolutely want to see this. It's long overdue. But cleaning up government inefficiencies is not the same thing as cleaning up corporate inefficiencies. You've got all kinds of legal restraints set, and there will be more lawsuits. Guaranteed, there's going to be many, many lawsuits brought against them to try to prevent this from happening, because there are all kinds of mandates, obviously, within the federal government. I can't keep track of any of them, but we know they're out there. So there's going to be a lot more resistance to this than just, your standard Fortune 500 downsizing.
Oh, yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, I would like to think that they're going to have some success. Certainly, I was thrilled that they went after USAID and also the National Endowment for Democracy, two nefarious, really pernicious organizations that have brought a lot of evil to this world. And a lot of people aren't aware of this, but that's regime change central right there. And they needed to be taken down. And those organizations were so impervious and so just dominant, like they were untouchable, like they were made men in the mafia. And so the fact that they were targeted was an absolutely amazing thing. And people should be very happy about that.
Absolutely. So on the current topic of things going on, you think we need a UFO czar, as it's been suggested?
Yeah, sure. I mean, why not? I think it would probably be a good thing. I mean, that person would have my sympathy, whoever they are, because that's a difficult task. You get, a number of years ago, I remember there was a tweet by Tom DeLonge, and he was much more public about this. And he said, look, you really want to see serious change, you're going to need like a legal revolution. And I mean, my take on that is like, you've got this privatized bureaucracy. It's partly government, but it's a lot private. They're not really like, who are they accountable to? Who are these guys? It's not really clear. What's definitely clear is that a lot of the secrecy of this has been privatized. It's not just classified, it's beyond that. And so getting to it may not be easy. And even if you're Donald Trump, and if you really wanted to get to the bottom of this, you issuing executive orders here and there, you could probably have some success, but would you actually learn everything that you want to learn? I was told by a source that I will always trust and believe about Jimmy Carter back in 1977, and that I was told directly by a man who was in a great position to know that Jimmy Carter was briefed on UFOs back in June of 1977. And this individual did not tell me what was said because he wasn't present at the briefing, but he did tell me when the doors opened, the president was seen either sobbing or nearly sobbing with his head in his hands and his elbows on his desk. He was upset. And it was a UFO briefing. Something was told to him that was not good. So I don't really know what the whole situation in the depths, the bowels of the labyrinthian national security state happen to be, or the privatized components of that. But it could be difficult. Not impossible, but there's a lot of work cut out. And so a UFO czar, a UAP czar, certainly would deserve the support of the American and global public, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. No, we used to call it UAP here on Disclosure Tonight a while ago. It was actually called UAP Disclosure Tonight up front. We shortened it to Disclosure Tonight and changed it back to UFOs just for the main piece. You ask a lot of the common citizens out there about UAP, they're like, UA what?
Yeah, I know.
Keep the terminology the same and everybody understands it.
Well, you know, it's a funny thing. In the very beginning of this book, I have 2 pages where I talk about UAP versus UFOs.
Nice.
And I mean, it's a significant thing to talk about. You know, for the longest time, I resisted using UAP. I liked UFOs because you kind of knew what they are. It's like you tell someone, I saw a UFO, they're going to kind of instinctively know.
Right.
UAP, the way especially that the Pentagon uses this phrase. I mean, look, they talked about Chinese balloons a couple of years ago as UAP. No one would ever have talked about them as UFOs. We would have laughed. Like, you're going to call that a UFO for real? But they can do it with UAP. And the point is, UAP are much more nebulous. And it gives the Pentagon an opportunity to pretend that they don't know what these things are. You know, it's really like that. Like, oh, well, these UAP, we're looking into it. We'll get back to you when we find something out. It's like, yeah, okay, let's keep going with that little game of pretend. So UAP facilitates that to some extent. On the other hand, you can understand like why they did the switch over. I mean, for years and years, the truth is a lot of people were not satisfied with UFO as an acronym. Even back in the 60s and 70s, there were attempts to break away from that, and they just never succeeded. And there's a reason, like, do they actually fly? Do they fly the way we understand aerodynamics? Or are they using some kind of space-time mechanism to do that? Is that really flying? Is that accurate? Are they actually objects all the time? If they're a glowing ball of plasma, I guess that's an object, but maybe it's something a little different. Like, there are reasons to wonder about that terminology. So we're at UAP, which is now unidentified anomalous phenomena. It used to be aerial phenomena. Even that acronym's changed. So it's unidentified anomalous phenomena. Hey, the cool thing about it is that includes USOs now. A USO can be a UAP. So I'm like, all right, fine.
Yeah.
We'll bring it in. We'll work with that.
Absolutely. As long as everybody understands what it is, that's the key. Now, we're entering a new era where we've got this privatization going of the UFO saga by Silicon Valley and companies like Planner, who are funding like Skywatchers and other groups. Do you think this is a step in the right direction, or are we only going to lead to more now corporate secrecy?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably where this is going to go. Let's just be real. You know, when the internet started, it was like, oh yeah, everyone can just do their own thing. But now it's dominated by corporations. That's what happens with everything. So in a sense, it's good because you want multiple voices and multiple perspectives on this, for sure. But there's always the likelihood that it's going to be hijacked by some powerful interest anyway, whether it's military intelligence or corporate. That's, I mean, honestly, it's probably inevitable. But I do think overall it's a good sign that we're seeing more private initiatives, for sure. And, you know, maybe not all of them will be hijacked. Maybe some of them can remain true. And I believe that that's entirely possible. So I think it's a good sign that we're looking at some an expansion. I mean, the technology is such that ordinary people are more and more able to do things in terms of investigating this. And I think that's always a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, one of my last questions I've got here, you know, some people have said that UFO disclosure has happened. I'm saying it started at this point. When we look back at 2025, will we say that UFO disclosure has advanced, or stalled? You know, we've had 2 hearings on UAP since 2023.
I'd say it's creeping along slowly. I wouldn't say it's quite stalled. It's a slow creep. We're still at a really basic level. I mean, first of all, we're not even at the level where we haven't had disclosure. There has not been disclosure. Disclosure is the United States government, hopefully the president, standing in front of a camera telling the world these things are real and they're not ours and they don't come from here and we don't think they come from this civilization. That's the beginning. Then, but there are so many levels of what is truth. You know, we can't even agree that they're anomalous, but beyond that, do we have any of their stuff, their technology? Do we have any of their bodies dead? Do we have any of their bodies living? Are there any of them living among us as custodians of the U.S. government? Are any of them walking among us? Do any of them have bases here on Earth? Maybe one like 3 miles from your house, for all you know. I mean, there's a lot of questions here that this thing can go really deep. And so that's disclosure. But instead, what do we hear? We don't hear the government talking about disclosure. We hear the government talking about transparency. That's very different. We're going from UFO disclosure to UAP transparency, and they are not the same thing. Transparency is really easy. Government can say, oh, yeah, we're being transparent. Nothing here. Here, take a look. Our records don't show any UAP. We're being transparent. I mean, that's an easy thing for them to do. So, no, we have not had disclosure. That is absolutely not the case. But we have had the breaking and unplugging or the breaking of some part of the dam starting in 2017. We are now having a more open conversation. It is no longer an instant career killer for someone to talk about this as if they believe it. So that's all good. That's all really good. But the thing that surprised probably many of us, surprised me, I'll certainly admit this, because I wrote a book called After Disclosure back in 2010. Feels like 1,000 years ago. Well, in that book, my co-author and I assumed, both of us just assumed, that with some big revelation that an avalanche would follow immediately thereafter, because it would be impossible to deny. A major sighting, a major leak, something like that. And yet what we have had since 2017 are, I mean, collectively, a series of profound admissions. I mean, the U.S. Navy's admitted that they encounter UFOs and that they have reporting procedures for them. Holy crap, that's very important. We had the admission starting off in 2017 that the government had these UFO tracking programs called ATIP and OSAP. Well, that's kind of interesting. We had the Tic Tac encounter coming out. That's rather important. And we've had a lot of other sightings that have come out, Navy sightings particularly. Brian Graves' story back, a few years ago was powerful. I would have thought if something like that had come out in the 1970s or 80s or 90s, would that have caused disclosure? I mean, maybe I would have thought so, but it hasn't. Because the thing that we've all underestimated, or at least I'll say I underestimated probably, was the resilience of the deep state or of the national security state to just stonewall to the max. No matter how much information has come out, they can continue to stonewall and they get away with it. So that's the thing. Now, how long can that go on is the real question. And, well, we're all here to watch this unfold because we really have, this is the true story of the irresistible force meeting the immovable object. The secrecy group is the immovable object, and we are the irresistible force. And we're not done. So we're pushing. At some point, I don't know when, but at some point, this is going to break. And we'll just see what it looks like when we come out the other side of it.
Yeah.
I got a follow-up to that.
Go ahead, Mike.
That was very good, the book that you wrote with Bryce Zabel, After Disclosure. And you were right with the points that you made at that time. But when David Grush testified publicly under oath and revealed a lot of the information that he did about what the government is keeping secret, that should have bursted the dam wide open, and it didn't. People pushed back.
I agree 100% with that. I agree 100% with you. Yeah.
And I'll give you an example about what you're talking about as far as how the government hides this information when they're pushed to reveal it. An example of that would be the author of the Immaculate Constellation report that went to Congress, that whistleblower. And when the DOD was asked directly if they're aware of any SAP program known as Immaculate Constellation, Susan Goff said publicly that they are not. And as far as they're concerned, it does not exist. Funny thing, she was telling the truth, believe it or not, of all people, especially coming from the DOD and her in particular. And we cover and talk about her a lot here on the show for good reason. But the reason she was telling the truth is because, as it turns out, that Immaculate Constellation unacknowledged special access program was actually a presidential, right from the White House, right directly from the executive branch, an unacknowledged special access program, not a DOD program. So she was telling the truth. No one knew about that. No one knew publicly that there was even such a thing as a presidential unacknowledged special access program, let alone Immaculate Constellation. But there was. Now, my question to you is, and I don't know if you are aware of this or not, but that author, that whistleblower that was ready to come out publicly, went with George Knapp and Jeremy Corbell to Representative Nancy Mace to have him come out at the November 13th second public UAP hearing. And they worked for months behind closed doors with her in particular to have this witness come forward. At the last minute, she prevented this witness from testifying and then pulled in very quickly the 4 witnesses that testified at that hearing. She also took the credit of bringing that witness in from Jeremy Corbell, who spoke very publicly about this. And interestingly enough, Thomas and I broke this story on October 24th of 2024, a couple weeks before the actual hearing on November 13th, that there was shenanigans going on behind the scenes with key high-ranking members of Congress and members of the executive branch. And then Corbell came out publicly and confirmed that story and said that she had given Michael Schellenberger to take the credit for the story that Jeremy Corbell was working behind the scenes with her on, with this whistleblower who was going to come out publicly. Now, this is somebody, Representative Mace, who is publicly a disclosure advocate. But as we found out, it turns out that in behind the scenes, she's actually not. Now, I don't know if you were aware of all of those details.
I was aware of most of that. Yeah, most of that you've said, I have heard this. But what I didn't realize is that you guys were on top of it before anyone. So kudos to both of you. That's very important. Yeah, I mean, I've not known what I think about what Nancy Mace did here. I'm familiar with this as well, that Jeremy and George, and Jeremy mainly, apparently cultivated this guy and should have, I mean, you know, he deserves to have gotten the credit for that is one thing. Why she did what she did at the last minute is something that I would like to hear her speak about. Before I'm condemning her, I mean, it's easy to do that, and it could be that she did something really dastardly here, really wrong. But I would just like to hear what's going on behind the scenes that prompted this, because it's very strange. I agree with you. It's a very strange thing, and it seems wrong. It seems wrong to me. I guess I'll go that far, but I would like to know more.
I could tell you what convinced her to do that.
I would love to hear.
She was told that this is a serious threat to national security, and that if she was to allow this witness to testify, that it would damage national security for the United States. Now, being a patriot and a standing member of Congress, she believed that she was doing the right thing by dealing with it the way that she did. And strangely enough, at the November 13th hearing, Representative Mike Rounds made a public statement confirming everything that Thomas and I talked about before the hearing and what Jeremy Corbell talked about after the hearing. And he said that they were specifically told not to ask certain questions and not to speak to certain people publicly. And he said that publicly. He made that announcement, which confirmed everything that we were talking about. And I know the reasoning why Nancy Mace decided to do that with this witness that was prepared to come out publicly. And if you've talked to George, I'm sure he filled you in behind the scenes on a lot of what was going on. So you're familiar with it like I am.
Yeah, I'm somewhat familiar with it. And, you know, why she gave the seat to Schellenberger instead of Jeremy Corbell, I actually don't really know why, except that she might have thought Jeremy would be hard to control. Jeremy might be seen as a bit of a wild card. I just speculate.
Right. But she was also told that this is a serious national security threat. And they don't want our foreign adversaries to have any inside information as to what we're actually up to. And that was what convinced her to do what she did.
Why would they bring up Immaculate Constellation at all then? I mean, if it's, you know what I'm saying? If it's such a dramatic threat to national security, you would just say, well, they're not going to discuss it at all. But yet they bring it in this kind of roundabout way through Schellenberger. What's up with that?
They did because they had control over Schellenberger and they didn't over Jeremy Corbell.
Yeah, okay.
And that's why they chose to do what they did, and which means that Schellenberger then lied under oath, which is something that nobody is making a point about. No one's talking about it. I'm sure George filled you in on a lot of what was going on and for how long it was going on. The other thing that George mentioned was he found it strange that when they were working with Congress for all that time, months before the actual hearing, it seemed to Corbell and Knapp like the only thing that Congress was interested in was what information they had to bring out their files on what they knew about what the government was covering up. Not so much about Immaculate Constellation itself. And George was very suspicious about that, as he has every right to be. He was 100% right. They did not want to divulge a lot of the information of the stories that they were working on, but he found it odd that they were pressing him from Congress about that information.
They were fishing for finding out what he knew. Yeah.
So that's odd. None of this makes a lot of sense because publicly, these people in the UAP caucus in Congress are pro-disclosure. But behind the scenes, it turns out, not really. More hypocrites than they are telling the truth.
Well, what we don't know is we don't know who's behind them and what forces are buffeting them. I mean, you know, I don't know, and I'm not trying to defend these people, but I mean, we have to recognize the fact that, of course, there is major secrecy groups in there. There are threats. There are all kinds of behind. We heard Grush talk about people's lives being at risk and people dying as a result of this. Do we really doubt that members of Congress are immune to being threatened in ways that would probably scare the living daylights out of them? So I'm not defending this, but I think we have to recognize there are probably powerful forces that are saying absolutely no effing way are we going to allow this stuff to get out. We're going to prevent this, any kind of meaningful disclosure from happening. Those people are not walking away from the table. And I suspect that these members of Congress are sort of caught in the crosshairs here, in the crossfire. I wouldn't be surprised.
I don't think that they were threatened with their lives to convince them. I think what convinced them is their patriotism and the fact that they were told this would be a national security threat. I think they were more effective in convincing them and getting them on their side to play ball than they are with using blunt force threats.
Quite likely, but I don't know all of the tools in that toolbox. And I do think veiled threats are probably part of it.
Whether it's against them, their friends, their family, their circle around them, the CIA has interesting ways of getting people to work for them the way they want.
They do. And you were right. After you brought the Wilson Davis notes out, you made similar points. You said, who's actually behind this? Who's controlling this? Right, Richard?
Yeah, no, I've been wondering this my whole life, and it's who's threatening Wilson? Who's behind? Who are the private entities that are involved in this, and who do they answer to, and on and on and on. It's a murky labyrinth, and you know, going back to the whole idea of a UFO or UAP czar, or what can the president accomplish? It's not impossible to get some light shed on this, but it's a lot more difficult than I would have thought 15 years ago when I wrote my book on this.
Yeah.
Right. No, you're right about that. But I could tell you this. Thomas has said publicly for a long time now that if we're going to get actual disclosure, it's going to come from the top down. It's going to have to come from the executive branch, not the legislative branch, not a particular congressman, not even a witness, a whistleblower. It's going to have to come from the top down. Right, Thomas?
Yep, absolutely. It's an executive branch cover-up.
But with pressure from below, because I think there's going to have to be a lot of pressure put on the executive branch to do this. And that could be in the form of, I think that's why I think the congressional hearings are a great idea. Anything that can kind of energize public sentiment or even congressional action is not a bad thing. And it could help move the executive in the direction they want.
Well, let's get to the core of the rotten apple of our government, the part of the government that turned us from the United States of America into the national security state of America that happened in 1947 when we got the National Security Act, when they gave us all the three-letter agencies. A couple years later, we got the Atomic Energy Act.
Yep.
1954, yeah.
That's right. The development, that's the whole secret state apparatus that came into being. And it sprung into being because America had become an empire and it needed, I mean, in terms of actual efficiency, you can't run an empire the way you run a republic.
Right.
That's what happened with Rome, and it's what happened with the United States.
Yeah. Anyway, you know, I'm being sensitive of your time. We're over the 2-hour time limit. I've got some other questions here from people in the chat. Is it okay if I follow up with you on this on email?
Oh yeah, for sure. Absolutely. You guys are great. I'm so glad to be part of your show.
Yeah.
Oh, it was a lot of fun. You are a great conversationalist, Richard. Contrary to
right back
opinions.
at you, right back at you guys.
Thank you very much. Well, hopefully we can get you back here again soon in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent.
For sure.
Oh, we would love that.
Yeah.
So would the audience.
Be very happy to.
Excellent. Well, we're going to be nice and let you go. Thanks for coming in today, Richard. It's been a phenomenal time to have you here. Talk about your books, talk about your thoughts on USOs, and more importantly, to talk about some things that are really pertinent now in the world of disclosure.
Yeah, no, we're living in an amazing time period and an incredible subject that is just exploding in every single direction. And I mean, it's exciting to be part of this time, and where it will end up, I don't know, but we're all here and we're all going to watch it happen. Yeah,
absolutely.
And you've done amazing work along the way, Richard, I got to tell you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Very appreciate that. Thanks a lot.
Well, thank you for coming in. We know it's kind of late. It's 11:08 p.m. your time, and appreciate you coming in here today. It's been wonderful.
It's been my pleasure, and I'll do it anytime in the future.
Thank you, sir. You have a great evening.
Thank you as well. Thanks very much. Thanks for having me.
Have a good night, Richard.
Good night, guys.
What a great conversation with Richard. Holy cow. I want to thank everybody for coming out for this episode of Disclosure tonight. And as we usually say at the end of every episode of Disclosure tonight, eyes open, no fear, be safe, everyone. We'll catch you on the flip side. Good night, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.